This is my full review of the English version of Qian or Thousand Autumns by Meng Sishi. Note that this will contain spoilers, so if you haven't read Thousand Autumns yet but don't want me to ruin the story for you, please watch the first impressions video I made instead. In this video, I'll talk about the novel's book structure, what I thought of the story and the characters, and also answer that all-important question, is it spicy? And add my closing thoughts. The English version of Thousand Autumns is split into 5 books. Aside from the cover art, each has interior illustrations as well, and every volume contains appendices with character names, historical references, and so on. In my first impressions video, I did recommend reading the historical references because Thousand Autumns is set in a specific time period in history, China's Northern-Southern Dynasties period. I think it's great that the publisher included this appendix because personally, my education didn't cover Chinese history in detail, so having this extra information helped me grasp the setting of Thousand Autumns more. One thing I would have also wanted to see was a map. Throughout the books, there will be lines like, "In early February, they arrived at the capital of Wei province." And I would think, okay, where is that? Having a visual reference would have helped me connect with the story more. I guess the publishers realized how important a map can be because one of their newer series, Changjinzhou, or Ballad of Sword and Wine, does include a map. I will talk more about maps later in this video. Another thing I wish were different is the division of chapters between books 3, 4, and 5. If you notice, volumes 3 and 5 are pretty thick compared to volume 4. I think book 3 should have concluded at the point when Shen Qiao heads to Chang'an after getting separated from Yanushi, and that would have been a good cliffhanger. If book 4 started with the chapters introducing Doyan and Yuan Song, then Shen Qiao's daring rescue of these children and the ensuing showdown in Chang'an would have been a better continuation of chapters between books 3 and 4. Likewise, Book 4 ends at the point where the Huanye sect and Shen Qiao are taking on a royal hostage mission, but it ends at an awkward point when the gang is in the middle of preparing for their mission. I think if Book 4 had ended at the point where the Emperor suddenly appears in the Empress's quarters, then that would have built up the tension a little more, in anticipation of Book 5. But then again, if books 4 and 5 were divided that way, then Book 5 would have been mostly extras. There's over 100 pages of extras in Book 5. But enough about the books themselves. Let's talk about the story. The expression Qianqiu doesn't mean a literal thousand autumns. Instead, it usually means a very long period of time. And a lot of events can happen in that time. At the beginning of the novel, we are told that 20 years ago, a Taoist martial artist named Qi Fengge, leader of Xuandu Mountain, defeated Hulugu, the top martial artist of the Tuzhui, a nation on the northern border of the Central Plains. Qi Fengge made Hulugu promise that the Tuzhui would not set foot in the Central Plains for 20 years. Now, 20 years have passed, Qi Fengge is dead, and once again, the Tuzhui people are seeking to occupy the Central Plains. Multiple martial arts schools exist in the Central Plains at this time. Some are Taoist, some are Buddhist, some are Confucianist, and others follow the demonic path. With their combined forces, these schools should be able to drive away the Tuzhui, right? Unfortunately, these schools are too busy challenging each other, vying for influence in the Central Plains, and also searching for the mysterious Zhuyang strategy, a set of scrolls allegedly containing secret martial arts techniques. Basically, these schools, or sects, are too busy fighting amongst themselves to notice the enemy at the gate. Well, actually, some of them are scheming with said enemy. Remember Hulugu? He has a disciple, Kunye, who challenges the current leader of Xuandu Mountain, a priest named Shen Qiao, to a fight on top of a dangerously steep mountain. Shen Qiao is seemingly defeated and plummets to his death, except he doesn't. The barely alive Shen Qiao is discovered accidentally by Yang Wushi, leader of a demonic sect, and his disciple Yu Xingyan. Yan Wushi also has a personal interest in finding the Zhuang strategy, and one of its pieces happens to be hidden in Xuandu Mountain. And so, the story of Thousand Autumns begins. As I mentioned in my first impressions video, Thousand Autumns takes place in a world with a thriving Jianghu, so expect to read about martial artists duking it out every few chapters, whether that's a casual spar or a duel to the death. Be ready to suspend your disbelief a lot, because apparently martial artists are capable of death-defying feats. For example, Shen Qiao survives a fall from a mountain, although he becomes temporarily blind. Similarly, Yamushi survives an attack that cracks his skull. I guess the lamp soup helped? Only to have a split personality when he wakes up from his coma. You may have also heard Thousand Autumns being described as philosophical, and I have to agree. Few novels in this genre have made me pause so often while reading to ponder questions like, if you repay evil with virtue, how can you repay virtue? Or the discussion of personhood in this passage. You are him, said Shen Qiao. I am not. Shen Qiao was at a loss. Then, who are you? Yamushi complained. A face is just the surface, a shell. Why put so much stock in appearances? I know everything he did to you. Don't think that philosophical equals boring, though. Thousand Autumns is sprinkled with many funny moments, mostly of Yamushi getting under Shen Qiao's very thin skin. For example, when Shen Qiao gets angry after Yamushi uses Shen Bei to remove feathers from some birds they cooked and ate, Yamushi assures him it won't happen again. He then proceeds to use Shen Bei to scale a fish he caught. Thousand Autumn's story has many layers to be enjoyed. But what is a story without its characters? Let's get to the people who made the story happen. Yamushi is repeatedly described in the novel as mercurial, as someone who does things on a whim. One particular whim he decides to act on, upon learning that Shen Qiao has survived his injuries, is to take Shen Qiao to the dark side, to turn his heart towards evil, and convince him to join Huanye sect, which Yamushi is the leader of. He is also repeatedly described as shameless. You know those people who are so talented that they can afford to be assholes to everyone else? He's kinda like that. And he really doesn't hold back, even publicly displaying affection for Shen Qiao just so people will think that he's Yamushi's kept man. And, as if to prove Yamushi's belief that people's hearts are basically evil, it doesn't take long before the rumors spread in the Jianghu that Shen Qiao, former leader of the famous Xuandu Mountain sect, is now glued at the hip, like a celestial couple, to the demonic Yamushi. But that's not even the worst of it. After witnessing Shen Qiao being betrayed by both Yu Wei and Cheng Gong, and the blind man seemingly unfazed by both betrayals, Yamushi orchestrates a betrayal of his own. He immobilizes Shen Qiao and brings him to Sang Jinxing, leader of a demonic sect known for its sexual cultivation practices, and leaves him there. This one event is the reason why some Thousand Autumns fans still question whether Yamushi is a redeemable character. And to be honest, even today I'm still on the fence about whether I like him or not. Don't worry, Lao Yan. There will be a whole other video about your venerable self. Wait for it. The joke's on Yamushi, though, as Shen Qiao manages to escape Sang Jinxing's clutches, although he loses his wukong, or martial arts abilities, in the process. Then, when he learns that a group of martial grandmasters are planning to ambush Yanmushi because, number 1, he's allied with the current emperor of Zhou, and number 2, they have personal grudges against Yanmushi, Shen Qiao, despite his own misgivings, goes to his rescue, because his death would add to the current political upheaval. I know I keep mentioning Shen Qiao, but haven't properly introduced him yet, so let's do that. At the start of Thousand Autumns, Shen Qiao, the second disciple of Ji Fengge, has inherited leadership of Xuandu Mountain and is challenged by Kunye, Hulugu's disciple. I've heard other sources describe his personality as pure, but like I mentioned in one of my videos, I think that's an oversimplification of Achiao's character. After all, this guy has poked someone through the heart with a stick, and he can also destroy someone's neili or internal energy so they can no longer practice martial arts. So, Shen Qiao is not meek and mild, he's just not violent until he needs to be. Throughout most of the story, Xian Qiao is blind, which makes traveling around the Central Plains and fighting very challenging, and proves just how skilled this Taoist priest is. But his blindness is not just physical, it's also metaphorical. The Xuandu Mountain sect has traditionally distanced itself from worldly matters, other than leasing out land in nearby Xuandu town to farmers and innkeepers. That's right, people, Xian Qiao is a landlord. Let that sink in. So Xin Qiao himself has had little interaction with the people in the wider world of Thousand Autumns, and is, in a sense, blind to their cruelty and deception. As he himself tells Yaoshi, "Before I left the mountain, the only world and Jianghu I knew was the tiny little space that my late Shizun had told me about. I'd never seen it with my own eyes." Thus, in the beginning chapters of Thousand Autumns, Shen Qiao is easily duped, ridiculed, and taken advantage of by the people he encounters. And yet, there are also kind people in this cruel world, like Shu, who thanks Shen Qiao for sharing his food with Shu's family, after Shu's own father complains that Shen Qiao did not give them enough food. Shu eventually becomes Shen Qiao's first disciple. There's also Pulyuru Jen, whom Xin Qiao meets at the Su mansion. Pulyuru Jen instructs the mansion staff so that the blind Xin Qiao can eat more easily, and also defends Xin Qiao when Li Jinyu starts lecturing Xin Qiao on his apparent deviation from the morally upright Xuandu Mountain and allegiance with the demonic Yan Wushi. Shen Qiao's eyesight eventually improves as the story progresses, and so does his ability to discern the intent of the people he encounters. In a later confrontation with Yu Ai, Shen Qiao says, "What's done cannot be undone. That which is broken cannot be repaired, and no reparations can make up for the wrongs inflicted. What people call reparations is only a way to deceive themselves and others." I don't think I've ever come across a character in this genre who is as self-aware and reflective as Shen Qiao. He reacts to the worst situations in a calm and thoughtful manner, but he also knows when to fight back. This sickly Taoist priest is definitely no pushover. There are many more characters in Thousand Autumns who are remarkable in their own right, from the self-righteous Li Jinyu to the eternal third wheel Yu Xingyan. Oh, Yan Wenning can be besties. But what I'd also like to highlight are the many female characters who, through their accomplishments, show how particularly cruel the Jianghu of this novel is towards female cultivators. There's Yuan Shou, leader of the Huan sect. It's mentioned in the novel that others think she only gained leadership through her relationship with Sang Jinxing, but she is a true martial arts master, able to hold her own, first against Yamushi, and later against Xin Qiao after he rebuilds his martial arts. There's Bai Rong, who aspires to also lead her sect. She sees nothing wrong with using sexual cultivation techniques to improve her martial arts. Xin Qiao worries at the start that Bai Rong is being coerced into demonic cultivation, and even suggests that she leave the Huan sect out of concern for her. Meanwhile, Yamshi dismisses her martial arts as party tricks. There's also Yuan Zhixiao from Liuli Palace, who appears during the sword trial conference to decide the new martial artists' rankings. As soon as she is announced, people at the conference question her ability, calling her a weak woman until she starts reciting their signature moves and weak points from memory. You could argue that I shouldn't be looking for memorable female characters in Danmei novels of all places, but it's a pleasant surprise when I do find them. I might do another video about these ladies specifically. And no, I didn't forget Zhao Qiying. How could I possibly? Now, I will try to answer that all-important question: is Thousand Autumns spicy? Well, you know how I said before that Golden Terrace is not like Arha? Thousand Autumns is also not like Arha in the romance department. I've described Thousand Autumns before as a slow burn. Most of the spicy scenes involve Yamushi temporarily immobilizing Shin Qiao so Yamushi can kiss him, in order to embarrass Shin Qiao in front of other people and ruin his reputation as a morally upright Taoist. And also possibly Yamushi just likes Qiao's face. After all, Shin Qiao is frequently described as a beauty in the novel. At some level, Shen Qiao knows what Yamushi's intentions are, and tells him this after Yamushi survives getting his skull cracked open. I know you want to ruin me. You believe that there is no kindness in the world, that a soft-hearted person like me has no reason to exist. You want me to open my eyes and see the cruelty within human hearts, to plunge me into hell, sinking and struggling until I become a part of that hell myself. Considering that Yomushi sold him off to the devil, I think Shen Qiao is being generous with his words here. Speaking of Sang Jinxing, that one event becomes a sticking point in Shin Qiao and Yanushi's relationship. You know how some people who go through a breakup say, I don't want to talk about my ex, and then keep mentioning their ex in conversation? That sort of happens here. Yamushi says things like, I've never regretted handing you to Sang Jinxing, even up to today. Now, you have the chance to witness my misfortune, yet you look like you're mourning your mother. Or, if you weren't foolish, could I have sold you to Sang Jingxing without you even being the wiser? And when Xin Chao ponders how he is mentally guarded around Yanushi, these are his thoughts. Back then, Xin Chao had already regarded him as a friend, but Yamushi had sneered at him, then discarded him like a worn-out shoe. While speaking and smiling gently to him, he'd been in secret contact with Sang Jingxing, presented Xin Chao to him, then thrown Xin Chao's sincere heart to the ground and stomped it into powder. Ouch! With this much bad blood between them, is there any hope for these two? Well, it wouldn't be a Danmei if they didn't end up together. I think the turning point is when Yamushi witnesses how Xin Chao interacts with Xieling, and considers that maybe it would be nice if this soft-hearted, foolish Taoist patted him on the head and bought tangerine for him. Maybe it doesn't matter that Xin Chao isn't good enough to be his opponent. Xin Chao, meanwhile, has a moment of gay panic when Yamushi practically confesses to him just before they arrive at Chunyang Monastery. But even after Yamushi's fight with Hulugu, Shen Qiao spends 70 pages of epilogue in Book 5 before he processes his feelings, and the two of them start making out in an alleyway. Hooray! And then they end up at an inn, and the innkeeper's assistant mentions an insistent rattling noise from the second floor. Also, hooray! To answer the original question, yes, Thousand Autumns is spicy, but you have to wait until book 4 or 5 before there are any feelings involved. And much like Golden Terrace, most of the scenes are described creatively, leaving the reader to fill in the blanks. For example, in one extra chapter, Lao Yan and Ah Chao have a conversation like this. Sect Leader Yan, please have some dignity. Dignity? But you didn't seem to be so worried about my dignity last night. Thousand Autumns has so many layers of depth to it, but also knows how to laugh at itself. And if you're willing to invest the time to immerse yourself in the events and characters of its world, it's definitely a rewarding reading experience. I do wish that some of the storylines got fleshed out a bit more, like that interaction between Gu Hongbo and Yuan Zhixiao, or the uprising being plotted by the Liuha Guild. Possibly, this was intended as a setup for future stories by the author, much like how some names which are dropped in the extra chapters also appear in a later novel, Wu Shuang or Peerless, also published in English by Seven Seas. Speaking of immersing, remember how I complained earlier that Thousand Autumns didn't have a map? Well, I made one for Volume 1, including references to the text mentioning the locations. The link is in the description. If you're still undecided about reading this novel, here's a slide to help you. The term Qian means a long time, and it can also refer to the future or an eternity. I really like this novel. It's gonna be stuck in my head for a while, and I can imagine myself going back to read it every now and then.